What is going on, guys? It's your boy Collins, and in this tutorial we will be creating this effect. Let's jump right in. I want you to go ahead and look at the link in the description and be sure to download every single thing. Be sure to download the practice videos, the visual effects asset, and be sure to go ahead and purchase these visual effects assets down below. From big films and action VFX, be sure to buy everything because you will be using them in this specific tutorial. Because if you don't do that, and if you don't import this, you will not be able to get the best results. So for the best results, you need to buy the following down below. Go ahead, check it out. Let me know what you guys think. So first, I want you to go ahead and let's just hit Control S or Command S to save your project. And go ahead and save your project and rename this to Slow Mo Flight. Press Enter to save your current progress. And let's come all the way over here into the footage section and grab the Slow Mo Front Flight. Drag that into the composition. Go ahead and zoom back out and press this to fit to up to 100. Change the quality from full to quarter. And then come all the way over here, somewhere around here. Hit Control D to duplicate this layer. Right click it, go to time, freeze frame. And then press Enter and then rename this to BG for background. Change the color to brown. Now what we're doing is, and turn off the sound, what we're doing is we're basically frozen the background so it can allow us to basically do some animation, but we might not use it, but I just kept it there just for any reasons. So go ahead and place a lock on it. And let's say if I move this time indicator a few frames forward, so just about right here. Now, what we're going to create is we're going to create a scene where my character is already flying. So to be honest with you, we will not be using this background. This scene is going to be the scene where he's already in the air. So we're going to come all the way over here to where I kind of lift up my leg a little bit from the ground. I'm going to hit Control Shift D to split the layer. Click on this layer, press Delete. Move this time indicator a few frames forward. So just about right here. And I'm going to hit Control Shift D. And then I'm going to split this layer as well too. I'm going to move this a few frames forward. And since we're not going to be using the background, guys, I do apologize for creating it. Click the BG and then delete it. Come all the way to the very end and then maybe come a little bit. I think maybe right here is good. And then come over here into your slow-mo camera movement. Drag the slow-mo camera movement below our layer. And as you guys can see, I have created, if you turn off the top layer, I have created some sort of camera movement to allow us to do some animation to our scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the Effects and Presets tab, and we're going to search up 3D Camera Tracker. Click on 3D Camera Tracker and drag that into your camera movement. Click on the Advanced, click on Detailed Analysis so we can have a much more detailed analysis of our shot. And then go ahead and just allow this to work. So we're going to be working with this specific footage, but below, if you go ahead and turn off this layer, you can see that our background is currently analyzing. So whilst our background is currently analyzing, we're going to be applying some different visuals to this specific scene. Now go ahead and change this back to fit to 100. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to rename this layer to Man Mask. And change the color to maybe like yellow. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control S to save our current progress. And we're going to come all the way over here to the very end right here of this last frame. Press N on the keyboard. And then maybe right click, trim comp to work area. That way we can only be working with this specific area. So what I want you to do is come over here and click on the rotor brush tool. Change the quality from quarter back to full. Zoom all the way in a little bit. Hold space, click and hold space, and then reposition. And then go ahead and double click the man mask and then hold space one more time and reposition it somewhere around here. We're going to be drawing a mask around our subject. Click on the rotor brush tool, click on the man mask, and then come all the way over here and start to draw a mask. Okay, so it says After Effects warning, rotor brush strokes cannot be added until the current frame has finished rendering. So let's go ahead and wait. If we turn off this layer, let's go ahead and wait for this to finish rendering. So if I come back into the composition settings, you should see that the background is still analyzing. So let's wait for the analyzation to finish, and then we can go ahead and apply some effects. So once it is finished rendering, you should see that in our layer, we have created multiple different levels of camera movements. And at the same time, if you zoom in, you should see this, a bunch of different camera tracking data. We're going to go ahead and press create camera. And then we're going to go ahead and turn off these two layers. We're going to come back to our mask layer and we're going to turn this back on. We're going to come back into our layer mask and then we can continue our what's it called, rotoscoping. So be sure to go ahead and draw a rotoscoping mask around our layer. Zoom in a bit, hold Alt or Option to remove all these unwanted areas. And then go ahead and draw a roto brush around our character. Now, what you can even do is hold Control and then click to increase or decrease the size of your brush. Now, remember, this does not have to be completely perfect because there'll be a lot of elements in the way, but it's always advisable to shoot this behind a green screen so you don't have to worry about rotoscoping. So be sure to mask out your character and mask him out really well. Since I shot this outside, it's going to be a little bit difficult, but guess what? You just got to have patience. Everything will completely pay off. So try your best to rotoscope this as best as possible. Hold space, click and hold, and come all the way down here and select the guy's feet. Hold Alt, my apologies. Hold Alt and then go ahead and deselect unwanted areas. And be sure to select it very well in the very beginning. Select everything so that the computer knows exactly what to work with. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and move to the next frame and allow the computer to start masking out. So if you start to see some errors, zoom in a bit, hold space, hold Alt, right? Click on the rotor brush tool, hold Alt, and then maybe deselect this area. Select it again, and make sure you keep zooming in to adjust the rotoscoping brush over and over again. Easiest way, shoot this on the green screen. Move to the next frame. Hold space. Move to the next frame. Like I said, it doesn't have to be completely perfect. Based on the elements we're going to be adding, it's going to allow us to, I guess, play around with this a bit. Again, I highly recommend shooting this behind the green screen. Go ahead and select all these areas. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in to the next layer. Deselect some unwanted areas. And what you can even do is press play. So now if you press play, you can start to see the rotoscoping AI is completely masking out our subject very well. Now, I did stay still. I tried my best to stay as still as possible because the whole kill is that you want to stay still as best as possible in order to make this effect look much more realistic. And I highly recommend shooting this on a green screen so that you can save a lot of time from all this rotoscoping thing. You can feel free to make this as perfect as possible, but for my scene, I'm only going to be working in these specific frames. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow this to play a little bit, but I'm going to trim this a little bit once again. The reason why I'm going to be trimming this composition is because I just want to show you the whole general idea. Now, once the rotoscoping is finished, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to also click on the selection tool, come back into my composition itself. And let me move this all the way to the beginning. If you zoom in, you can clearly see that everything has been perfectly masked out. This is definitely taking a long time. Let me come all the way to the very end. Let me see if it did something. It's the only thing I hate about rotoscoping because it takes a long time for it to render due to the quality. So we just have to wait a little bit. And let me see if it fully did this properly. See, that's 67 frames, 73, 75, 78, 9, 81. I'm going to wait a little bit. You can clearly see that there's some error right here. We didn't fully mask this out properly. But that's what I'm saying. It's okay. So we can clearly see that throughout our frames, the rotoscoping has done a really good job cutting my subject out. So we're going to go ahead and press feather, and we're going to feather out our edges a bit. Just feather them out a bit so we have a smooth edge. And then maybe I can reduce the shift edge a bit to maybe like a -7. So we can remove a little bit of those hard lines from our scene. And then maybe increase the shatter a bit or decrease it a bit. Let's see if we can decrease it. Just leave it at 0. You can increase or decrease the contrast to your liking. Maybe I might decrease the contrast a bit. Decrease the contrast a bit more. And then maybe the shift edge, I might just increase it a bit to like 22. Hit Control S to save your current progress. Now, if you guys did watch the previous tutorials, we're going to be doing the exact same thing in this scene. Come all the way over here to the very end, press N on the keyboard. Come over here back to the very beginning. Hit Control S to save your current progress. Solo this out. Come to the file, export, add to render queue, and change the settings from H.264 to QuickTime. Change the format options to animation. Press OK. And make sure you change the channels from RGB to RGB plus alpha. Press OK. Click on this. And go ahead and bring it in this composition, in this area. And rename this to mask body. Press save. Press render. And allow this to render out that rotoscoping, right? Let it render the whole entire thing. And then once it's done, you're going to come back to the slow motion flight scene, click on the project, and then come over here and maybe turn off this rotoscoping layer. Turn on the background again. You can turn on the sound if you desire. And then go ahead and double click this space. Come back into where you had processed the mask body. Click on the mask body, press import, drag that into the footage layer, drag the mask body into our layer itself. And as you can see, if you look at this, we have a perfectly masked out our layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the man mask and then we're going to turn it back on. And this time around, we're going to click on the rotor brush tool and we're going to delete it. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to crop this a bit. And we're just going to find that moment where the background is in frame. So let's find the moment where our character's out of the frame, just around right here where the background is a little bit still. So turn off the mask body. That way you can see it a little bit better. Find the part where the character's out of our frame. Right click on it, go to time, freeze frame, just for the meantime. And maybe change the color a bit. Click on the mask body and place it back in the scene. So now if we turn off this mask, we can clearly see that on this specific camera movement, we can clearly see that our character is a little bit closer to the camera. So we can click on the mask body, press S on the keyboard, click on this anchor point tool, come over here until you see this little anchor point button, drag that beneath our character's feet, click on the selection tool, press S, and then scale this down a bit and reposition it somewhere a little bit far away from our shot. So somewhere around here. So if you delete the man mask, now it appears that our character is far away. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to come over here to the background, right click this, rename this to just background. And then maybe change the color to brown. Change the mask body's color to yellow. And then maybe place a lock on the background itself. So now if we go ahead and click on the mask body and maybe make this a 3D layer, right, by clicking the box. And if we changed it from full to quarter and we move this time indicator a few frames forward, my apologies, turn on the camera. My apologies, guys. If you turn on the camera, you can clearly see, hold space, you can clearly see that our character is somewhere over there in the sky. So what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to do something a little bit different. Turn off the camera, this little box thing, and just turn it off. Turn off the lock. turn off the mask body, click on the background itself, and click on the camera tracker. Turn the quality back to full. And then if you move through time, we're actually going to find a point in the 3D space where one of these points is always in our frame. And we're going to create a null object. So I'm going to go ahead and use maybe this null right here. Right click it, and I'm going to create a null. Now, if you right click it and you create a null, we have created some sort of position. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off that null layer. Press P on the keyboard, hit Control C, click on the position, hit Control C, and then come to the mask body and hit Control V to paste it, and then turn it back on. So now, if you move through time and you zoom out a bit, the mask body is somewhere in there. But what we're going to do is we're going to click on the mask body. We're going to press S on the keyboard, and maybe we're going to increase the scale a bit. If you don't see it, press P on the keyboard and then click on the mask body and then go ahead and make this a 3D layer. This is so weird. It's somewhere down here. So what we're going to do is if you zoom out, you can clearly see that the mask body is somewhere over here. Just click on the mask body and reposition it somewhere in our frame. Reposition it somewhere right here. And maybe change the orientation to maybe like the Z a little bit and reposition it and play around with it so that it kind of like blends in a little bit. Reposition it somewhere around here and maybe press S and increase the scale a bit. So now if you move this time indicator a few frames forward, it appears that your character is right here. And everything that we do is going to match perfectly with our scene. So what we want to do is we want to move this character in Z space backwards. Press P, hold Shift, and maybe come over here to the setting and crank this all the way back. We don't want him to be too close to the camera. We want him to be far away. We're going to press S on the keyboard. We're going to increase the scale a bit one more time and maybe reposition it somewhere back down here again. So you can reposition your character somewhere here. So now, as the camera moves closer to the scene, our character is still far away. We don't want him to be too close to the scene because then if he's too close to the scene, here's what's gonna happen. You guys are gonna be able to see the errors around our mask. We don't want that. So we're gonna hit Control S or Command S to save our current progress. And we're going to go ahead and zoom out. So what we're going to do next is we're going to change the quality back to full, and we're going to move this a few frames forward. And then just about right here, we want our subject to basically fly, because as you can see, the camera starts to pan up. So we're going to click on our subject. We're going to press P on the keyboard, set a keyframe on position, move 1, 2, 3 frames forward, and crank this all the way up. Come back over here, back to this keyframe, hit Shift S to bring up the scale, set a keyframe on scale, and maybe move a few frames forward and reduce the scale a bit. Maybe reduce the scale somewhere and move this keyframe all the way to the very end. And maybe take the position, right? Maybe like click on the Y axis and position it all the way up. So if you enable motion blur, if you come over here, move the time indicator right here and press play, sort of like created like a flight scene. You see what I'm saying? We've allowed our subject to fly. Now, what you can even do is you can come over here to that position itself, this specific position, take this position right here and delete this position keyframe. Click this position, zoom out, and you can readjust the orientation and you can readjust the position right here. So maybe if you want to move it, the x-axis, you can come over here in the settings, position it, reposition it right here. This is the Y, move it up a bit more. You can do that. Feel free to play around with the look. Hit Control S to save. If you come back here and press play, You see what I'm saying? We've created this sort of like a realistic flight scene. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna come over here in this specific keyframe at the very beginning and maybe move this up just a bit. Come back over here to the very end, move this down here a bit. And now, if you press play, we have created sort of like this slow motion animation of our character levitating. And then he flies. You see what I'm saying? Hit Control S to save. If you press play, there we go. So you see what we just did right here, right? We have allowed our character to be in three-dimensional space. And guess what? He matches perfectly with the background. Now, if you come over here in this setting and maybe increase the scale of our subject a bit, that way our subject is a little bit taller. And this makes him look as if he's flying in the scene. You see what I'm saying? Hit Control S to save. Now come back into your project layer, click on the sound effects, and maybe click on the Superman takeoff sound effect and position it right here. Double click L to basically look at the camera's what's called the waveform, and maybe reposition it right here where you want him to fly, and press play. If it's too loud, press L, and maybe lower down the volume a bit, and close that. Change the color to peach. And what you can even do is you can take the debris shake sound effect, drag that also into the layer, change the color as well to peach. And what you can even do is right click on it and go to time stretch, and maybe stretch this out to maybe like 150. So it's a little bit longer. So we get this extra sound. You can hit Control D to duplicate it and reposition the bottom one down here. You can press L, set a keyframe on the audio levels, come over here to the very beginning, decrease the audio levels to maybe like -40. Increase this a bit forward and press play. And what you can even do is click on this top one, press L, set a keyframe on the audio levels, come all the way over here to the very end and decrease this to maybe like -27. Press play. There we go. And then press Control S to save your project. So we have added some sound effects. We have added some 3D camera track, and we have allowed our subject to float. Now, isn't this amazing? I think this is incredible. Hit Control S to save. And what I want you to do is, I want you to come into this space, right click this, go to new, and add adjustment layer. Rename this to Distortion. Now, guys, I definitely do require you guys to grab the heat distortion, because the heat distortion is going to allow us to play around with the settings, and it's going to be much more better than creating distortion using turbulence, displacement. So I want you guys to purchase the heat distortion. If I told you guys that you guys don't need it, any plugins, I was wrong. But I want you guys to buy the heat distortion plugin. So when you buy the heat distortion plugin, come into the effects part, search up heat distortion, click on heat distortion and drag it into your distortion layer. And what I want you to do is draw a pen tool around our subject. So somewhere around here. And once you've drawn out this thing, press M on the keyboard and maybe change the color of this to white. That way you can see the mask. You can press F on the keyboard and feather the distortion out a little bit. Click on the distortion layer once again. And in the settings, maybe set a keyframe on the speed and the wind speed a bit. You can crank the heat amount a bit. Move all the way over here to where he's getting ready to fly. And then maybe crank up the wind speed a bit more. So it's slowly creating some sort of wiggle room. Hit Control S to save. Come back over here and maybe click on the parent link and pair it up to the mask body. So now if you come all the way over here, oops, we have a little bit of a problem. Change the parent link back to none. Press M on the keyboard and set a keyframe on the mask path. Move a few frames forward, drag this down, move a few frames upwards, drag this down, move a few frames forward again, drag this over here. So we're basically pairing up the distortion to our layer. Move this around here, come over here, reposition it somewhere here, come over here, and maybe reposition it down here. And then as he flies out of the frame, you can click on the mask, click the space down here, and readjust the mask a bit. Move a few frames forward, and then what you can do is come back here, click down here, click on the mask, move the mask up. As he's out of the frame, move the mask out of the frame completely. Hit Control S to save your progress, and hit Control Shift D at the end to split that layer. So now, if we change this back to fit, and we zoom in a bit and you press play, you can see that distortion is right there beneath our subject's feet. And there you go. Hit Control S to save. Now, what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go ahead and click on the distortion, press F one more time and feather this out a bit. And maybe decrease the heat amount a bit. We don't want too much, but we want a little bit. This is pretty cool. I love it. Hit Control S to save the current progress. Now let's go ahead and let's add some dust to our scene. So what I want you to do is click on the project settings, and I want you to come all the way over here to the VFX tab. Close the Big Films assets, and let's use the dust wave that I did provide for you guys. Click on the dust wave number 1 and drag that into our scene. Now place the dust itself on top of the distortion. Now change the dust color to green. And then if you move this time indicator a few frames forward, you can see that there's some dust coming from our subject. Now, since the scene is already starting with our character already in the air, we can just reposition the dust a bit, offset it a bit, hit Control Shift D, and then split the layer, and then delete that ending piece out. We're going to make this a 3D layer, the dust a 3D layer. We're going to click on our mask body. We're going to press the position. We are going to click on the position, hit Control C to copy, and we're going to place it on top of our dust. So hit Control V to paste. Press P on the position, turn off the keyframe. On the what's called dust wave, press S, increase the scale a bit more, and maybe change the offset a little bit, and then place this right here beneath my subject. So now, as the camera moves, the dust is in 3D space. You see what I'm saying? It perfectly matches well with my scene. You can hit Control D to duplicate this. Right click on this one, go to time stretch, change this from 100 to maybe like 150. And maybe this time around, press S on the keyboard, close this bottom one out, press S on the keyboard, maybe increase this a bit. And this time around, you can offset this a bit more and reposition it right here. And what you can even do is press T on the keyboard, set a keyframe opacity, move this a few frames forward, decrease this to 0, hit Control S to save. And then as we're getting closer to the camera, we get to see some more dust appearing in our shot. So what you can even do is reposition this somewhere down here. And then you can press S on the keyboard, set a keyframe on scale, hold Shift P, set a keyframe on position, and maybe you can reposition up here. And as he's getting closer to the camera, you can increase the scale a bit more by holding Shift and increasing the scale. Take this keyframe and move it all the way over here to the very end, and then we can have this slow animation. So what you can even do is, over here at the very beginning, maybe move it back in Z space a bit, position it right here, and then we can clearly see some dust coming from the ground itself. Hit Control S to save your project. Now, if you guys did import the Big Films pack, click on the Big Films asset, and you guys should see some dust to camera. Double click on the dust to camera 1 and you guys should see this effect. We have dust to camera number 2. You guys should see this effect. We have dust 3 and you guys should see this effect. Click on the dust number 1 and drag dust number 1 into my scene. Click on composition just in case you guys weren't able to do it. Click on the dust wave to camera and drag it right here. Now be sure to reposition this dust all the way over here at the very beginning. So the part where he flies off the frame is where we want the dust to appear. So we're going to also make the dust a 3D layer. We're also going to go ahead and click on the this specific dust, the top dust. Press P. Click on this dust. Hit Control C to copy. And then come over here to this specific dust. Hit Control V to paste. Press S on the keyboard and increase the scale a bit. Press U on the keyboard and turn off the keyframe on position. And then if you press play, you can see the dust matches perfectly with our scene. So what we want to do is we want to press S on the keyframe and maybe increase the scale of our dust a bit more. Reposition it up here, maybe down here, my apologies. Right click on the dust, go to time stretch, and maybe change this to like 40. So it can appear faster. So as he flies off, there's some dust coming off the ground. We want that. So come over here to the Effects and Presets tab, search up Hue/Saturation, drag Hue/Saturation into the dust wave, and then be sure to go ahead and click on Colorize. Change the saturation value to 0. That way, we've created sort of like this gray dust to kind of match our background a bit. Now, what you can even do is press T on the keyboard and you can reduce the opacity of the dust. Hit Control S to save and then close this. So if you press play, perfect. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add a few couple of elements to our scene to make this even much more cooler. Hit Control S to save. Come all the way over here back into your Big Films pack. Close that. Now, go ahead and click on the ground crack that we imported from Action VFX. Click on the ground crack 1A, the top, not the top, this one. Drag that into our scene and place it below the mask body. Make this also a 3D layer. Go ahead and hit Control V to paste the position settings. Press U, turn off the keyframe, solo it out and solo out our background. Zoom in a bit, press S, increase the scale, right? Increase the scale a bit. Somewhere around here is perfect. And increase it and reposition it on our ground. Come to the Effects and Presets tab and search up Linear Color Key. Click on Linear Color Key, drag it into the ground. And then click on the color pick and select this area. That way, if we unsolo it, you can clearly see the cracks are in place. So go ahead and position the cracks somewhere right here and maybe change the orientation just a bit. Change the x-axis a bit so it blends in with our background. So it's like this. So as you can see at the very end, we have this, what's it called, part. Now, we can choose to do this in one way. We can add the ground cracks right here when he flies off the scene. I think that would be much more realistic instead of adding it at the very beginning. But say if you wanted to add the ground cracks at the beginning, you can do that as well too. So just come to the very end where he flies off the scene, just around right here. Zoom out, take this ground crack and reposition it down here. Maybe what you can even do is right click, go to time stretch, and maybe change this to like 50. So we can speed this up a bit. Maybe change the color of this ground crack to red. And then if you press play, it happens pretty quickly. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to press P on the position and maybe move this back a bit and then just reposition it somewhere down here so that it doesn't appear to be in front of our dust, right? You see what I'm saying? Zoom in a bit, hit Control S to save. And then as you can see, we have added some ground cracks to the ground as our character flies off from the scene. What you want to do is come over here at the very end, hit Control Shift D, split the layer at the last frame, right click, go to time, freeze frame, and then extend it. So now, regardless of what, he's still in our scene. So if you press play, excellent. Hit Control S to save. Now come back over here to the project settings and let's grab some debris. So he's flying, but we want some activity to be going on in our scene. So go ahead and click on the wind number 1 and drag wind number 1 into our scene. Come over here to the toggle switches and mode, click on our toggle switches and mode, click on normal, change this to screen. Come back to the toggle switches and mode and make this a 3D layer. Now you can press S on the keyboard and maybe increase the size of the, the scale a bit of the wind, and then maybe offset it a bit, change the orientation value. You can change the Z axis a bit. You can do that. Hit Control S to save. And maybe reposition it down here. Press S once again. My apologies. Make this much more bigger, right? Just increase the size of our layer. So it's a little bit much more bigger than the frame. And now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna click on the track null, press P on the keyboard, to select the position, hit Control C, and then come to the wind and hit Control V. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna come back and press P one more time and maybe crank this a bit forward, right? So hold Shift and crank this back. This is going to allow us to move the thing in Z space. You can press S on the keyboard and maybe increase the scale a bit more once again so it's over the screen. So now if you press play, you can clearly see that there's wind in our scene. We have added some wind effects. You see what I'm saying? We've added some wind to our scene. Now that's one way to do it. Hit Control S to save. And you can always take the second wind, place it on top, below it, toggle switches of mode, change this from normal to screen, come back to toggle switches of mode, make this also a 3D layer, click on this, press P, hit the position, hit Control C for the position, click on the wind 2, hit Control V for and paste it in there, and then come back here, press S, click on the scale, hit Control C to copy the scale, click on the wind, hit Control V to paste the scale. That way, we have pasted everything back again. You can maybe position this wind somewhere around here, and you can let it be. And maybe offset wind number 1 a bit over here. And then maybe for the wind number 1, what you can even do is take the wind number 1, press T on the keyboard, set a keyframe on opacity, move this a few frames forward, and maybe decrease this to 0. Hit Control S to save. Now, come back over here to this specific wind, and what you can even do is press S, maybe increase the scale a bit more, and maybe reposition it down here a bit more, increase the scale a bit more, and maybe zoom back in, and press play. Now, isn't this cool or what? This is amazing. Hit Control S to save your current progress. Now, let's go ahead and let's add more elements to our scene. Now, as of course, our crack takes place, but we want some dust to also take place. So take one of those dust waves, hit Control D to duplicate the dust wave, and position the dust wave somewhere below, but also on top of our ground crack. So down here, reposition it right here, right click on the dust wave, go to time stretch, and change the stretch factor to maybe like 30. Press OK. And then maybe bring this dust wave somewhere around here. And maybe let's change the color of our dust. Type in hue/saturation, click hue/saturation and drag it on top of the dust. Click on colorize, decrease the saturation value. And that way we can have that gray effect. Just leave it at 0. Hit Control C to copy the hue. Come over here and select both of these dust waves. Hit Control V to paste them in there. So if you press play, we have added another layer of dust to our scene. So if you take this dust wave, you press S on the keyboard, and maybe if you set a keyframe on scale, move a few frames forward, and maybe increase the scale a bit. You can add an extra layer of dust. Now, if the previous dust is in the way, all you gotta do is come over here to this dust and turn it off. Hit Control S to save, and maybe you can zoom in and play around with this dust. Place it on top of the mask body. And then what you guys can even do is maybe, let's see, move this in Z space. So hit Control Z to go backwards, press P, and then move this forward a bit. And what you can even do is reposition it somewhere here. There we go. And maybe you can move this back. Press play. Now, if it's too fast, right click on it, go to time stretch, change this back to 50. So it's not too fast. Or right click it again, time stretch, change it back to 100. If you wanted to have a slow turnout, hit Control S to save. And then once you've done that, what's going to happen next is we're going to add some shockwaves on the ground. Come over here to the project settings. Come over here to the Big Films assets. Now, in the Big Films asset, they do have a bunch of shockwaves. They have this shockwave. They have this shockwave. They even have this shockwave itself. They have even these type of shockwaves. They have a bunch. So we're going to use the shockwave. Let's see this one, top 5. We're going to probably use a shockwave. This shockwave is pretty clean. We can use this one. And we're going to speed it up a bit. We're going to take the aerial shockwave number 4 and place it right here in our scene. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the ground crack, solo it out, solo out our background itself. And we're going to solo out our mask. Hit Control S to save the current progress. Now, the aerial shockwave, let's change the color of the aerial shockwave to maybe something like this color. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make that a 3D layer. Now, what's going to happen next is we're going to make sure we solo it out so you can see it a bit. So what we're going to do first is we're going to right click on it, go to time stretch, and change the stretch factor to maybe like 20. So it's a little bit much more faster. Or right click on it, go to time stretch. Instead of 20, maybe change it to like 10. So it's much faster. So we're going to go ahead and click on the ground crack. Press P on the keyboard. Take the position, hit Control C. Copy the position. Click on the aerial shockwave. Hit Control V to paste the position. Click on the ground crack once again. Come all the way and open it one more time. Click on the orientation. Hit Control C to copy the orientation. Come back to the aerial shockwave. Hit Control V to paste the orientation. And then what you can even do in the aerial shockwave top, press S and increase the scale a bit. Now you can go ahead and offset this again a bit like this. Change the orientation a bit like this. And then that way it could look more cinematic or something like that. Now this shockwave is pretty slow in a way, but if we press play, there we go. If we set a keyframe on scale, move a few frames forward and maybe increase the size of this a bit more and enable motion blur. If we press play, reposition the shockwave right around here. So it takes place right when our character is flying. We don't want it to be too late, so just offset it a bit. There we go. Come to the Effects and Presets tab, click on Hue/Saturation, drag that into the shockwave. Click on Colorize, and maybe decrease the saturation a bit to 0. You can feel free to increase the lightness a bit and hit Ctrl S to save. If you press play, now you can place the shockwave at the bottom, or you can place the shockwave at the tip. So you can move it up here and place it at the tip of our character's feet. Place that shockwave below the mask body so it appears that it's below. So the part where he's stepping on, it seems as if when he flies, the shockwave is still in midair, if that makes sense. So go ahead and hit Ctrl S to save. Press play. There we go. And then go ahead and unsolo everything. Ctrl S to save. Zoom all the way down to the very bottom and unsolo the background as well too. So now if you press play, we have added a realistic shockwave in space. Now you can let the effects be like this or leave it like this if you want. But if you want to add more stuff to make it look cool, just in case for those who did purchase the pack, we're going to add more stuff to make this look much more cooler. Now, for some reason, I do see some sort of flicker. I don't know if it's the dust itself that's creating that flicker. Oh, I believe it's the dust. If you solo out the dust wave, let's see if this creates any flicker. Okay, this one's not the one that creates any flicker. Unsolo it. Solo out the... come all the way up and maybe solo out the dust to camera. Let's see if that creates any flicker as well too. That does not create any flicker. Or is it the wind that creates the flicker? I see some sort of flicker, so let me see if I can solve the problem. Oh, it's the wind itself. So right click on the wind too. Right click on it, go to time stretch and maybe stretch this out to 120. So that it extends throughout, and then unsolo it. So if you come back over here and press play, there we go. And then if you come all the way to the bottom, my apologies, hit Ctrl S to save your current progress. Come over here to the beginning and press play one more time. Let's have a look at it. So you see what I'm saying? Everything is starting to look pretty neat. Now, the dust wave, this specific dust wave is a little bit too bright. So press T and maybe decrease the opacity a bit and maybe place this dust also below the shockwave. Press play. Now, what you can even do is come over here to the project settings, close this, come to the sound effects itself and grab the landing sound effect. Drag that into the composition, double click L. Go ahead and change the color of this to peach. Zoom down and maybe offset this a bit. So somewhere around here, what we want to do is we want to crop this out and maybe press play. That way we have an extra layer of sound. Press L and maybe decrease the volume a bit. And then maybe on the ground cracks, right? Maybe delete the extended frame. Right click on this. Right click on it, go to time stretch. And instead of making it 50, just leave it at 100. And then we can have some slow animation. And press Control S to save. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add more dust at the bottom. But let me scroll all the way up till you see the dust wave itself. Maybe press T and maybe increase the opacity a bit. Right. And for some reason, this dust, let me see, is it this dust or this dust? No. For some reason, this dust appears to be on top of it, but we want this dust to be below. So we're gonna press P on this dust, hold Shift, and maybe reposition this all the way back. Let me see if we move this position back. There we go. That way it appears to be behind the dust on top. Press S, increase the scale once again, and maybe place that below. Press P again, reposition it and move it all the way back a bit more. Press S, increase the scale a bit. There we go. So it's going to be behind the stuff. But as you can see that the shockwave actually cuts off at a certain point. So what we want to do is we want to also take the shockwave as well too. Press P and maybe move the shockwave back in Z space. More. Press S. Come all the way over here to the very end and maybe increase the scale. So if you press play, you can still see the shockwave cuts through the dust a bit. But that's if you don't want to add the dust wave to the camera. You see what I'm saying? What you can do is take the shockwave and maybe reposition the shockwave somewhere down here. And try this. There we go. Hit Control S to save. And maybe come back to the dust wave to camera. And what you can even do with this dust wave is maybe click on the dust wave to camera. Press P and move this position a bit forward so that nothing affects it. Hit S, reduce the scale a bit, and then press play. And then maybe go press T, reduce the opacity. There we go. So you can still see the shockwave as well. Hit Control S to save your current progress. Now let's come back to the VFX tab and let's add some flying debris. Now we do have flying debris, the what's it called? We do have the flying debris. These things look like some bricks or something like that. So that's the flying debris number 4 in the pack. What I want you to do is click on the flying debris number 4 and drag that also into your composition. And maybe place that also below everything else. Like place it until it's on top of the mask layer. Now feel free to change the color of this to maybe like purple. And then make this a 3D layer. Now let's use the same exact settings as the mask body by pressing position, hit Control C to copy the position, and maybe paste in the position on the flying debris itself. Now go ahead and press U and unkeyframe the position. Click on the flying debris, hit S, and maybe increase the size of the flying debris. Increase the scale a bit more, and maybe position it a bit. So we get some flying debris that's close to the camera, right? That's going to be our flying debris that's close to the camera. Now press P on the keyboard. And then maybe move this back a bit in Z space and position it somewhere like this. So there's going to be some flying debris in front of the camera. And you can always change that flying debris. So let's say if you don't want it to be wood, you can come over here, drag the hue/saturation to the flying debris, click on colorize, and maybe decrease the saturation to 0 so that it looks like rocks. Hit Control S to save your current progress. Keep playing. If it's taking a long time to render, be sure to come all the way to the distortion and just turn off the distortion. Press play. That way this can process much faster. You can always do that. Turn off the distortion for now, and then go ahead and grab the flying debris once again. Hit Control D. This time around, maybe right click on it, go to time, reverse layer, and reverse it a bit. And then maybe press S on the keyboard and scale it down a bit. Scale it down. And maybe this flying debris itself could be the flying debris that's closer to our subject. Scale it down somewhere here. And then the flying debris that appears to be in front of the camera, this big one, come over here to these settings and search up fast blur. Click on fast blur and place it on top of this flying debris. And maybe change the radius to maybe like 2. And hit Control S to save. If you press play, it looks like this. Now go ahead and turn on the distortion layer back on. Hit Control S to save. And when you turn on the distortion layer back on, you can clearly see we have some rocks in our scene. Now go ahead and go to position, click on project panel, my apologies, and then come all the way over here till you see these sticks. Now be sure to drag that and place that also on top of it. Now this will be the flying debris number 2. And what you can even do is click on the flying debris number 4 and then come all the way over here to the transform settings. Select both the effects and the transform properties, hit Control C to copy, and then come back to the flying debris number 2, hit Control V to paste. So that way, everything that is in this is going to be in this and make this a 3D layer. That way you can see it better. So take the flying debris number 2 and maybe reposition it somewhere in our scene. Right? There we go. So as the camera moves, it also moves. You can also press S on the keyboard, reduce the scale a bit. You can do that. And maybe change the orientation a bit to your liking. So press play. Right? This adds to the effect. Click on it one more time, hit Control D to duplicate it again, right click it, time reverse layer. Press S, maybe reduce the scale a bit. My apologies, leave the scale a little bit and reduce it a bit. Press P and maybe adjust the position and maybe move this position somewhere close to our subject. And then now, if you press play, we have some sticks right in front of our subject. You see what I'm saying? And as the camera is moving forward, everything is in the frame. Hit Control S to save. Now, what you can even do is take the dust wave and duplicate it again and maybe offset it just a bit. And what you can even do is press S on the keyboard, increase the scale a bit, and maybe position it right here. Right click on this dust, go to time stretch, and maybe change it to 120. And you can add as many layers of dust as possible. To create that realistic look, press T on the keyboard and maybe have this dust always on this in the scene. Or matter of fact, hit Control Z to go backwards and maybe have the dust appear. So you can clearly see what we're trying to create. Hit Control S to save your current progress. And what we can even do next is we can grab the rocks, the flying debris number 1, and also drag that into our scene. And maybe place that also below everything else. Make this a 3D layer. Click on the flying debris number 4. Select both of the effects and transform. Hit Control C to copy. Click on the flying debris number 1. Hit Control V to paste. Hit Control S. Scale this up a bit. And maybe position it right here. If you press play, we have some rocks in our scene. We have added some sticks. We have practically added a lot of elements. You see what I'm saying? That's one way to do it. Now, if you don't want to add that, all you got to do is turn it off. So maybe I might turn off this sticks and stones. I might keep the sticks. I might turn off the previous sticks that's closer to my scene. And then maybe I can take the, I believe, which one is this one? The flying debris number 1, the rocks, and I might turn off the rocks. And then I can still have my effect. Hit Control S to save. So we have added all those things. Let's say we wanted to add a tree to our effect. Maybe click and drag the tree and maybe place the tree somewhere in this shot. And what you can do is solo out the tree and maybe solo out the mask, solo out the background. Hit Control S to save your progress. Now zoom in a bit and then go ahead and place the tree somewhere here. Now make the tree a 3D layer and then go ahead and take the mask body, press P, select the position, hit Control C to copy the position, click on the tree, hit Control V to paste the tree, and then come all the way over here to the very beginning, press S on the keyboard, and increase the scale of the tree. Now change the orientation a bit. Press U on the keyboard on the tree and turn off the keyframe. Maybe change the tree color to green because the tree itself is green. And position the tree somewhere here. Hit Control S, scale the tree down a bit. Scale it down. Scale it down a bit as well. Place it right here. And what you can do is press P on the keyboard and maybe offset this last position a few frames back and reposition it somewhere here. And then maybe adjust this a bit. Zoom in, select the mask, and then maybe select this area. Close the mask, click on this layer, press the mask, select what's called this area, subtract, press F, feather it out a bit. So we are basically taking away the shadow a bit. We want to take away the shadow from our effect. So we've added some trees to our scene, some moving trees. So it seems as if that tree itself is affected by what's going on. And it may be the part where he flies off the scene. Maybe you can take the tree, move it a little bit to the right. I think this is the tree. This tree is the only tree that's only moving. So just leave it like that. Hit Control S to save. And then we have basically just applied a tree to our scene. And what you can even do is go ahead and unsolo everything else again. And you can clearly see the tree is in our shot. You can come over here to the Effects and Presets tab. I do advise that you guys download the Color Vibrance plugin from Video Copilot. The Color Vibrance plugin allows you to adjust the colorization of certain things. I'm going to place the Color Vibrance plugin on my tree and then maybe reduce the vibrance a bit. Increase the vibrance somewhere around 12. And then maybe come over here and click on the green and maybe reduce it a little bit to white. Then press OK. That way you can add a little bit of a shade color or an extra color to my green visual effects. Now, if you come back to the project panel, double click this space one more time and you go back into the Big Films pack. I highly recommend downloading the Big Films pack. It's amazing. If you download the Big Films pack, you come back into the storm layer and maybe you select one of these trees like tree number 5, tree number 6. Import them. Select both of these trees and drag them into the Big Films asset. Click on the Big Films asset, come all the way down till you see the trees. And if you double click on this tree number 5, this is the tree where the branch falls off. Click on that tree and drag that also back into our layer. Now go back and solo these 2 trees, including your character, the mask body, and the background. Hit Control S to save. Click on tree number 1. Click on the drop-down menu. Close the mask. Select both of the effects and transform. Hit Control C to copy them. Click on the tree 5. Make this a 3D layer. Hit Control V to paste that. Now we have positioned the same thing. And what we can do is we can reposition this somewhere here. Right click on it. Go to transform. Flip horizontal. That way this tree could be on this side. And this tree can be on this side. Now, for those settings, what's going to happen is we can go ahead and move this a few frames forward, you can clearly see that the tree itself, the branches come off and it falls down to the ground. It kind of adds more of a realistic realism effect to our scene. And as our character moves up and as the camera pans up, of course, the tree itself kind of like loses a little bit of, it kind of like cuts off. So it's going to completely disappear from, oh, this is the mask. My apologies, guys. Where's the tree? This is the tree. There we go. So the tree number 5 itself still stays in the frame. And you can clearly see that everything fits perfectly with our scenes. So we have added some realistic trees and the branch falling off and all that kind of stuff. So if you basically unsolo everything and then you unsolo the background, you hit Control S to save your current progress and you press play, we have added all these elements to our scene. You see what I'm saying? And what you can even do is go ahead and let's say we turn on those rocks again. This makes this look much more realistic. You see what I'm saying? I might just turn off the rocks again. The rocks, I think this is rock number 1. I'm just going to turn those rocks off and leave the sticks a bit. There we go. Hit Control S to save the current progress. And then what I can even do is, let's see what else we can add. We did add the shockwaves. Click on the shockwave number 5. Let's see, this is a different type of shockwave. Okay, these are some ground shockwaves. Let's see. We don't necessarily have to add that. But let's see what they have over here with these other ones. Okay, this one is pretty cool. These ones, I think I already messed around with these ones a bit. These are some really nice dust visuals. Let's see. Move this a few frames over and he flies out the scene. There are certain things we can add. So let's even add another shockwave. So scroll all the way up, right? And then look for the aerial shockwave, this one. Hit Control D or Command D to duplicate it and maybe offset this a bit and make this a little bit vertical. And so what's going to happen is we're going to sort of like create this sort of like this three-dimensional dust. Now, for this specific one, what we can even do is press S, come all the way over here to the very end, and maybe increase the scale dramatically. So, and then maybe come into the effects control settings and maybe make this a little bit much more brighter. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the pen tool, the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle right here. Press F and then feather out the edge. Come back to the selection tool and select this. So if you press play, so you see what I'm saying? It just makes everything looks more realistic. Now you can have this dust be much more faster by moving it a few frames forward. And then you can press U on your mask body, take the scale, actually the position, and move it about 2 frames forward, and take the scale, move it 2 frames forward, so that the character can fly much more faster. Now, isn't that awesome? Hit Control S to save. This is pretty awesome. You can add more and more elements to your scene. Like, for example, like if you come over here and you look at the flying debris, you can clearly see that the flying debris itself is definitely on top of my, what's called my dust. So what you can even do is take this dust, I believe it is on top of my dust. You can take the dust, and then what you can do is come over here, press the opacity, set a keyframe on the opacity, move a few frames forward, maybe increase the opacity to 100. And what you can even do is take the dust one more time, press P, and then move it forward a bit, because we want it to be on top of our, give me 1 second. We want it to be on top of our layer. So move it all the way so it's on top of our layer. Press S on the keyboard and maybe reduce the scale again and maybe reposition it somewhere right here. Scale it down again and reposition it right here. And then what we have created is sort of like this slow motion effect of the dust covering our scene. So it should look like this. Press play. There we go. Now, feel free to add some lightning and some other stuff to your scene to make your character look much more cool. You know what I'm saying? You can add as many stuff as possible. Now, there is the, come over here to the project settings, and I believe there is, if you guys did purchase the action VFX cracks and stuff like that, if I double click this space and I go over here to my videos and I come back into the Academy and I go to import AE on this folder, I did grab some action VFX ground cracks. So let me just go ahead and import all of them. Press import. I'm going to drag all of them into a different folder, and I'm going to change this to ground cracks. And then I'm going to open the ground crack, right? And I'm going to look for this specific crack. This one right here, crack 4B. I'm going to click on crack 4B, right? And I'm going to bring it into my layer somewhere around here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way over here and drag it all the way down to where my cracks are at, offset it a bit, maybe increase the scale of this a bit, position it somewhere down here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the effects and presets tab. And in fact, instead of doing all that, I'm going to solo it out, solo the crack as well to the one that's above, solo out the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a bit, click on this specific ground crack, and select both the effects and transform, hit Control C, click on this ground crack and hit Control V. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and make this a 3D layer. And let's see. You guys should be seeing it. Give me 1 second. If you zoom out, oh, it's all the way back here. So press S on the keyboard and maybe reduce the scale a bit. Actually, reposition it a bit somewhere right here. And maybe press S and reduce the scale. Reduce this, oops, it's doing too much. Reduce the scale a bit and reposition it. Reduce it a bit more. Reposition it, zoom back in. Reduce the scale a bit more and reposition it somewhere here. So it's gonna be like right here. Reduce the scale a bit more. And that's very weird. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out a way to position it properly in my scene. Click on the ground crack, press P, select the position, hit Control C to copy the position, click on this specific layer, hit Control V to paste this. And for some reason, it's not appearing. So I'm gonna press S, I might maybe increase the scale a bit. There we go. Let me go ahead and increase the scale a bit more and make the scale a bit much more larger. And then increase the scale one more time and reposition it right here. That way, there we go, you can see it now. So we have added some cracks directly in front of our scene. So if you change the quality to full, you can see the cracks a little bit much more better. Placed it a little bit down here, press S on the keyboard. S, sorry, and maybe reduce the scale a bit. You can feel free to come into the effects and controls and then maybe adjust the matching softness a bit. You can make the matching softness to like 7, and the tolerance, you can decrease the tolerance back to 0. And if you press play, we have some ground cracks sticking to our scene. Hit Control S to save. Now, come back over here and unsolo everything. Now take the landing sound effect, right? Take the landing sound effect, press L on the keyboard on the landing, and maybe change this back to like -3, and maybe offset this a bit. And then if you change the quality back to 1/4 and come over here and press play, let's hear how it sounds. Oops. Change this and move this all the way over here. And what you can even do is press L on the keyboard, set a keyframe on audio levels, move this keyframe all the way over here, and then maybe come over here to the very beginning and maybe decrease this all the way to -55 and press play. Come back over here to the very beginning, press play, allow it to render. So you see what just happened, right? Perfect. So come back over here and click on the dust wave and maybe reposition the dust wave a bit down. Press S and then make the scale a bit more larger. And then if you come back and press play, so you see what we just created, right? Perfect. Now feel free to adjust the lightness of this specific dust. Make it a little bit brighter. Perfect. So now we have created a realistic flying subject effect. Hit Control S to save, and then maybe come all the way to the very bottom and then select all the layers. Right click it, pre-compose, and type in done effect. I didn't spell it well, but it's okay. And then go ahead and click fit to 100 in this specific layer. Hit Control S to save. And then maybe what you can even do is come all the way over here. And then what you can even do is come over here to the part where he basically flies out the scene. Hit Control Shift D. And then what you can even do is come to the Effects and Presets tab and let's search up Motion Tile. Click on Motion Tile and drag it into this layer. Click on Mirror Edges. Change this to maybe like 250. 250. And then what you can even do next is you can search up this effect called Wiggle. Click on Wiggle Position. Drag Wiggle Position into my layer. And then what you can do is crank this all the way up a bit. Enable Motion Blur. Crank this up a bit more. And what you can even do is come over here to the very beginning and then set 2 keyframes on this, come over here to the very end and maybe decrease this down all the way to like somewhere like 30 and change this down to like 6. So it should look like this. There we go. So we get that extra boom effect. Right? And then come all the way over here to the very beginning. Click down here, select the effects, hit Control C. Come over here, hit Control V to paste. Press U, take these 2 keyframes and actually take these 2 keyframes, move these keyframes all the way over here. Select these 2 keyframes, move these keyframes all the way right here, and crank this down to 0. Enable some motion blur. Hit Control S to save and press play, and let's take a look and see how it looks like. Just allow it to process. Sometimes it may take a little bit longer. And watch how it looks like. What you can even do is come over here to this keyframe, press U, and then come to these keyframes and maybe drop this down a bit to like 11. No, drop this down to like maybe like 12 and drop this down to like 12 as well too. That way there's not too much shake. Hit Control S to save and press play one more time. So there's just a little bit of a shake. And there you go. So when our character flies off the scene, this happens. You see? Excelente. Now hit Control S to save your project. And let's go ahead and add some camera color correction. Now, as you already know, I always like to use my favorite one. I taught you guys how to add some color correction in the very first episode, so be sure to check out the first one. I'm going to press T, reduce this to maybe like 75 or 74, and then press play. Ooh, this is looking too good to be true. I love what I'm looking at, guys. We've added some distortion. This looks too good. Take a look at it one more time. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit Control S to save. And then let's go ahead and click File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Come over here, delete this. And then make sure you change the settings and make sure you save it as whatever you desire to save it. And then maybe press save, press render. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Bye-bye.